Ladies and gentlemen, we can now have an insightful interactive session about some general information of doing business in Singapore or for our members from India to gain information about adding value to themselves from Singapore company secretaryship angle. I now invite our Singapore committee members CS Nitish Chandan, CS Dinesh, CS Priya, and CS Hemiksha to please come on stage and answer to the questions that our guests may have today. A big round of applause. Mike.
Any questions that you have? Anything?
Hello. So the purpose of this session was like during the interactions and networking events with the many members, many members were asking certain questions about Singapore, how to enter the Singapore, what type of opportunities are available. So we thought of having one session wherein whatever specific questions you have, you can address to us, and we will be in a position to solve your doubts on like entry or any questions you have specifically. So that will immensely benefits to all the member instead of just interacting with one-to-one. So that was the purpose of this session, and that's why we all are here to answer your specific questions.
Hi, I have a question for Mr. Dinesh and Mr. Nitesh. So as you know, like a lot of people here are pass out from ICSI India, and you being a company secretary, I being a company secretary, and we are working here, right? So I want you to brief everybody on opportunities they can find in Singapore or APAC region other than India. It would be helpful for, I think, everybody here.
Okay, so ICSI has a MOU with Singapore Association of Company Secretaries. It was called ICSI, now it's called CSIS, whereby you get exemption in most of the papers. So you will only have to pass 3 papers to convert into local company secretary degree. And based on that, you can practice here if you wish to, or you can get a job. If you are not converting this, you can still work as a paralegal or not as a named company secretary, but you can still work as a company secretary in Singapore. There's one restriction though, that is that CSIS will only accept you if you're a local resident. That means an employment pass or a dependent pass or some pass holder in Singapore. So one way is that if you have some sort of pass, you can directly enroll for CSIS. If you do not want to go that route, you can go via ICSA London route, for which we also have MOU. And if you are ICSA UK member, you can again convert your membership into Singapore Company Secretary Institute. Aside to that, in terms of job opportunities, most of us have double degrees, triple degrees. You don't have to work as a company secretary. You can be working as a compliance professional, a paralegal. If you have a law degree, you can do a lawyer. So there are always opportunities. And also in Singapore, there's one point to be noted that you need to be a member only to be a company secretary of a public company. If you are working for a private company, you do not even need to convert a membership to be a company secretary. And most of the companies in Singapore are private companies, basically, in terms of numbers.
Good morning. Yeah, my name is Amarnath. Yeah, I'm from India, Andhra Pradesh. Can you explain the difference between the incorporation of a company in India? As we know, a company secretaries in India, we know everything. But in Singapore, what are the prerequisites for a incubator or any overseas center they want to open the companies in India? So what is the prerequisites and what difficulties we face here for some mistakes, something like that? So can you brief about that? That company, anybody want to have a new company in Singapore? What are the requirements here? And what is the trade area where, as a company secretary, we can chip in and do it? some extra works from Singapore like that, because the world is open to everybody. So that in that case, what is the opportunities available mainly to the company secretaries in Singapore, both way. Thank you.
No, no, listen. You started talking about how to set up, what is the difficulty for a startup to set up a company in Singapore, right? There is no difficulty to start a company in Singapore. What you need is a resident director, okay? As far as the shareholding is concerned, 100% can be held by a foreigner or a company. Typically, being an Indian company coming to Singapore, you have the RBI restrictions. Either you come through the ODI route or under the LRS scheme, liberalized remittance scheme, US $250,000. After payment of taxes, you can come to, you can put your money in Singapore in your name. And both the cases, the bank acts as an agent for you, open a file with RBI. Annually, you file a return of your performance. And today, previously, there is no need to do audit. Because in Singapore, there is a definition of small company. Companies below $10 million business, 10 million asset, less than 50 number of staff, any two, if you are not fulfilled in a 2-year period, it's considered as a small company, as a definition. So there is no audit is required in Singapore. Previously, until October last year, RBI was allowing, even though it is not audited, when you file the annual return, they were accepting in the past. Today, after October, RBI started saying whether it is audited in Singapore or not, it has to be audited when you file the return back in India. So now, every company in Singapore, even it is not required to be audited in the Singapore terms, they are asking us to do the audit so that it can be filed back in India for the return. You have any other questions? What is the second one you are asking? Okay, I'll tell you. See, in India, what I've noticed is that the corporate secretary has got a bigger role to play than in Singapore. What I mean the bigger role to play is that most of the certification is done by corporate secretary in India. So every time the requirement, I do not know whether it's RBI or the Companies Act or the requirement is that the corporate secretary has to certify. In Singapore, corporate secretary certification is not there at all. Either it has to be certified by a lawyer or a practicing accountant like us. So the role of a corporate secretary is not important in Singapore. Maybe different in other countries. In Singapore, it's not important. The third one, as you was rightly saying, anyone can act as a company secretary for a private limited company as long as the Act says, as long as you are aware about the provisions of the Companies Act. Or in turn, they also accept people who have acted as company secretary in some other company for a period of 3 years. You are eligible to act as company secretary in the subsequent companies also, except in the listed company, where only the qualified people are accepted to act as qualified secretaries. Any other questions you have? No, that's what I'm saying. In Singapore, if I am a local, say for example, I have a Sing Pass to access all the government websites. There are more than 14 to 15 government websites I can access through using my Sing Pass. Even if you are a resident of Singapore with the employment pass, you get a Sing Pass also to have access to all the government websites. If I have a Sing Pass, I can form my company myself without a corporate secretary. You listened to my talk in the last one about combating money laundering. I'm going to touch about the new regulations they are planning to bring to avoid the money laundering things, in which I'm telling you what are the small changes they're planning to do. But coming to set up a company in Singapore, you yourself can go to the website and form the company. Then you can ask me which memorandum article association I'm going to follow. There is a template inside. A common template is inside, and then you have a code to find out which type of business you're going to do. Take those 2 codes, put it into that, and say that you're going to be the director, because you being a local person, because you need one resident director for setting up companies in Singapore. Any number of foreign director is allowed. You can have 10 foreign directors, one resident director from Singapore to set up the company. So you become the one. So if it is only one, even sole director is also allowed. So you can set up the company by going into the website. There is no restriction. Foreign company can come to Singapore. Sorry.
I'm talking to as an
No,
Indian.
if you don't
Indian
have a SIN pass, if you come from foreign, you have to approach either a corporate secretarial firm
Yes.
or an auditor like me to set up the company. Or even you can approach a guy who is locally here with a SIN pass.
I think you cannot, sir. You will need to have a CSP license before you can file. So
No, I'll
you
explain to you
must
what
get-
he means by CSP license.
I'll also amend one more thing, sir, two more things, with due respect to your opinion. One thing is that company secretary, qualified company secretary, is needed for not a listed company, but also for a public company or a company limited by guarantee. You said listed company only, and I'll also beg to disagree that role of CS is not important in Singapore. You can set up a company, but how to run the company? Most of Indian companies that come to Singapore, you will have Series A, Series B, Series C investment. That's why they come to Singapore. That not anybody can do. Law might allow you to have anybody as a company secretary, but you will need the skills, the qualification, the experience, which probably somebody who has an experience will only be able to provide. If you want to ask constitution, you can take anything. But if you want Series A, Series B, Series C, preference shares, Singapore Companies Act says that all terms of the preference shares must be included in the constitution. You cannot take that from ACRA standard. This is something that a professional, a law firm, a company secretary will be able to draft only.
Yeah.
If you want to run one-person business, okay, maybe it's fine for you. But if you want to run a professional business, which I believe that if you're coming from India, you are a professional entity, you have substantial setup, you will need a qualified company secretary. So what I want to add is that Singapore law doesn't insist on having company secretaries qualified, but it leaves the compliance to you. That's Singapore style. Compliance is with you. You will be liable for non-compliances. That's one point. And if you want to set up a company, if you are local, all parties are local. That means directors, all secretary are local. Then you can set up yourself, as sir mentioned, via SingPass. The moment you have any foreign individual, you will have to have a CSP license, which can be awarded to auditors, company secretaries, lawyers, or whoever the law allows, basically, some other profession also. So at that time, you will have to approach one of these parties, company secretaries, auditors, lawyers, or somebody who's having a license, and only that person can enter the name of a person who is a foreigner into the government. If you're coming from India, definitely you have Indian directors, Indian shareholders. So to answer your question, one line, if you're coming from India, you cannot set up yourself. You will have to go to a professional, a chartered accountant, a company secretary, a lawyer. There is no shortcut to that.
The difference between India is then a chartered accountant, a company secretary, anybody can be incorporated company. There should be mandatory, the chartered account should be appointed, but company secretary is not mandatory. But I think in Singapore,
You have 6 months.
Yes.
You have 6 months to appoint a company secretary from the date of incorporation. And if secretary resigns, the position cannot be left vacant for more than 6 months.
so that means at the time of incorporation itself, the company secretary should be undertaking that. I'm thinking
Yes,
compliances.
and even let's say you go to sir and he set up company for you, he will have to appoint himself as company secretary, not auditors.
Yes.
So even though he's an auditor, he will have to appoint himself as company secretary.
That
He
is
will reflect
CSP
that.
license, you're telling, CSB license. Something.
Yes.
What is the connection?
CSP license.
It is a license for people to be able to file, registered filing agents. So it has to be a professional, it cannot be
I will explain on that point. See, what happens is corporate secretary firms are there. I'm not saying corporate secretary firms are not there at all. Please don't mistake me. What I said that individually can form companies, there are going to be a lot of amendments going to come, which I tell you in my talk. What he says, right, you can form a corporate secretarial firm. Okay, you don't have to have a qualifications here. What you have to do is, after you incorporate your corporate secretarial firm, you have to pass an examination with ACRA, which is mainly for money laundering and countering financing of terrorism, which is an online question and answer. After you pass that examination, you have to score, they will ask you 40 questions, 2.5 marks for each. You should score 80 marks. Then if you pass, then they give you a certificate of practice to practice corporate secretarial. That's what you were saying, okay? So
That's not the only requirement, sir. So that is one of the requirements for renewing a license. The requirement is that you must be a company secretary or an auditor or a lawyer
Yes, correct.
or a person. But if you want to renew your license, you have to pass your
ACRA exam.
exam. That's for
Money
the money
laundering.
laundering. But at the end of the day, I'll repeat that even if an auditor sets up company for you, he will have to appoint himself as company secretary, not auditors. So they can act as company secretary if they want to set up.
I just also want to add another dimension to the discussion. I think I heard a few people asking what are the opportunities for company secretaries. One thing for sure, Singapore is a land of opportunities, and the role of company secretaries is definitely evolving. I would say only in India, globally. We are trained by our profession to look at laws and how they apply in our specific situations. Interpretation, analytical skills, of course, comm skills are given, right? In my experience, what is really important is that we need to be continuously learning about new and emerging laws that are emerging, not only in our trade, but broadly. And especially in the context of Singapore, it is home to a lot of regionally headquartered companies. The sir mentioned in his remarks about ease of doing business and how India and Singapore are trade partners with shared democratic values and traditions. So I believe for a CS professional who's looking at India at Singapore as an opportunity, well, first and foremost, looking at the lay of the land, looking at which particular sector you're interested in, and your role will evolve beyond corporate compliance. It will be to all the compliance aspect that would be applicable to a sector. So stay hungry and just keep on learning about new things is what I would suggest. Thank you.
If I may just add to Priya's point here, so and one thing that I moved to Singapore like 4 or 5 years back, but in my experience, and I'm not a Singapore qualified company secretary like some on the panel, but for me it was still easy to kind of adapt to the local laws. Obviously, the ICSI has trained us enough, and we have worked enough in India, so that knowledge definitely helps us here. But the one difference that I see here is the MAS, the ACRA institutes, basically the ministries here in Singapore, they are like super cooperative. You have a query, you don't have to struggle, you don't always have to reach out to a consultant. If you have a query, just drop them an email, they are just a phone call away. So I think that is one big shift that we see here, and that's really an ease of business experience that's for new professionals like us who come to Singapore and who are venturing into corporate laws, not having a local degree certainly, but I think that's one big difference that I experienced in Singapore.
Yeah. Secondly, in addition, like when we are a company secretary in India and Singapore, the difference between the two countries for setting up is here you can set up a company in one day. So morning you apply for a name approval, by afternoon or evening you get it. And immediately if you apply for a company, your company is set up in just few seconds. Another difference is we are all aware about the memorandum and articles of association. So in India, we have to draft, we have to sign, and physical signed copy is compulsory to be certified by company secretary, and then only we can upload. So it takes time. Whereas in Singapore, if you adopt constitution, which is the standard constitution, you don't need to do anything, just click the standard constitution and your company is set up. If you want other than the standard constitution, then you can draft the constitution, get the signature from the shareholder and upload it. But most of the times, to save the time, you just adopt the standard constitution and it will be done. So ease of doing business, when we see actually and practically difference between two countries, in India, we have to have memorandums, articles, and signatures. Physical signature is compulsory on writing the things, which is not mandatory in Singapore.
Just to correct the last statement, in India also nowadays, with SPICE, we can incorporate a company within a 1 day or a 1.5 day. We also do have a DSC. We also have to fix a DSC on MOA and AOA. That erstwhile, we have to do a physical signature. With DSC of company secretary and DSC of 2 directors, we can also have a company within a 2 or 1.5 day. We have done. My query I'm on my query. What are the law in Singapore to have a company secretary? If someone asks to me, I can say 10 crore in India, paid up capital. I can see a paid up capital and say, is it required or not required? Additionally, do a chapter at ICSI chapter at Singapore, doing any activity with regard to placement and training.
So in Singapore, each company must have a company secretary. As I said earlier, if you set up a company, you must appoint within 6 months. and once secretary has resigned, it cannot be vacant for more than 6 months. That's the law. But if it is a public company or a public listed company, the company secretary must be a qualified professional. This one we already discussed, so I will not go back there. Coming back to the placement step, we are comparatively at the newest chapter. We set up during COVID. Our inauguration was also online. So yes, we do have plans. We are trying to have some collaborations with the Chamber of Commerce or wherever we can. It is in the pipeline. Probably next time we meet, we will be able to give you more concrete update. But as of now, we are working on it. We can confirm we are working on it. It's a long process, baby step, one by one.
Yeah, maybe just to add on to
Training
Nitish.
requirement, is there any? If we go in India, it's 21 months, 24 months, or 15 months erstwhile. Okay, is there any training requirement to have a membership of CISI?
So if you are working for a public company, of course, you should be a member before you get appointed. But it's private company, no. You must have experience and, skill levels as mentioned to be able to work as a company secretary. Must be aware of regulations, must be aware of all the requirements.
It's a
If I put it-
self-certification for private companies mostly.
I see a hand back there.
Hi. So my question is for a company secretary aspiring to work in Singapore. What are the key acts and regulations a company secretary should be conversant with if he or she wants to work in Singapore?
Well, the list will be very extensive, but for sure Companies Act, the base, that's our Bible always. And once you are conversant with Companies Act, of course, I will recommend knowing something about Income Tax Act for sure, because they will have questions. Most of the times, company secretaries will also liaise for Ministry of Manpower. So some of the manpower rules that I'll recommend that you must be having. So these three are basic that most of the company secretaries, especially in practice, will be dealing most of the times. That is your Income Tax Act, Manpower Act, and Companies Act. And aside to that, whatever you can learn, you can get an expertise and will be a value add for you. And it will always help your practice or profession for sure.
Yeah, I just add one thing here, that there are some sector-specific requirements, depends on what trade you're working in. But in addition to what Nitish sir just mentioned, I would also suggest knowledge about data protection laws, a general understanding. PDPA, which is the Data Protection Act in Singapore, you need to have just a basic understanding of how things work. And then there are a couple of other horizontal laws, for example, the Cybersecurity Act. Cybersecurity is all pervasive. So having a general understanding of these laws would definitely help you in advising your internal and external clients about the lay of the land in Singapore. Thank you.
And what about the laws regarding the listed companies?
Listed company is basically you will have to have the understanding of the SGX manual, and aside to whatever we decide, that should be sufficient for you. Yeah. So maybe probably you have to go something about MAS also if you are going for some other fundraise or something.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I didn't get that question. Paid parameters? It varies a lot. First of all, with due respect to, with due respect to everyone, when a company secretary comes from India to Singapore for the first time, he might be having experience of 10 years, but he will be counted zero here because he don't know how to do ACRA filing. So first few years are always difficult. First 1 or 2 years, first job is always difficult. Once you gain that experience at a basic salary level, starting salary level, then you can add on experience that I have 10 years in India, 2 years in Singapore, 5 years in Singapore, then you can command a higher salaries. But in Singapore, we have laws about minimum for EP salaries are there. So of course, if somebody want to hire you on EP, they have to pay you minimum EP salary, that is $5,000 for financial sector, I think increasing to 5,500. So depending upon which sector you are in, you are being employed, that's the basic salary as per Ministry of Manpower to hire you on an employment pass. But then again, I will say that if you secure a job, minimum you will get is that. Previously, what happened is that a lot of members who are on dependent pass allowed to work as an LOC. That was actually not that good salary at times, but then again, LOC are not allowed to work anymore. So that option is closed. There is an exception before somebody points it out. If you have one pass, then the dependent can work on LOC, but that's a very complex situation. So if you secure a job, you will get an employment pass most likely, 99%, and your basic salary will start from 5,000 or 5,500 depending upon the sector. And then it is the baseline. Above you can be getting, if you are experienced enough, I have seen people 20,000, 30,000. If they have banking experience, you come to the same bank. So it's upper is no limit, lower is minimum is 5,500 as per Ministry of Manpower. So that's basically should be getting, somebody's giving less than that, should look at the manpower regulations.
And just to add to Nitish's point is, if you are working for a banking sector or for a fintech company, which is what we see presents a lot from an industry standpoint, certainly the pay factors are much better compared to other industries.
First and foremost, the entry, anybody wanted to come to Singapore, they need to go for a minimum one pass, that is either employment pass or PR. So to get the employment pass, the basic salary, as Nitish says, is now it is 5,500. But most of the time, if you are coming from India and if the company is hiring you from India on a fintech or other corporate secretarial experience, then normally on an average, people do get minimum 10,000, because if you don't get 10,000, it is very difficult for survival in Singapore for any individual along with the family. So my take is approximately on an average, you can assume 10,000. Unless you get less than 10,000, you should not accept the job also in Singapore.
So I think for budding company secretaries who have just cleared their CS maybe, and we have some of our committee members in Singapore who cleared their CS and they moved to Singapore immediately for good reasons. And I think they are doing fantastic because the start was at the Singapore salary. And obviously they are benchmarking and they are leveraging their education from India and they have grown here. So I think that's a great opportunity for budding company secretaries, definitely. Once you get married and you have families and you have all the financial obligations, it gets challenging to kind of cope up with the expenses, as sir mentioned. But then, yeah, as budding company secretaries, I think there's a lot of opportunities in this country.
So in interest of time, we'll take one or two more questions. Yeah. Okay, we'll take two more.
Thank you so much for this discussion. It is helping a lot. So my question is that in India, in major listed companies, we have like 5 company secretaries, 10 company group of 5, 10 or 20. Head is only one on. But in Singapore also we have this many company secretaries in a single company.
Yes, I know one of my friend works for SIA group. They have team of more than 100 company secretaries.
In Singapore.
Because they have so many, because there are so many subsidiary companies. I mean, it's not just the qualification or the name, it's the amount of work that they're having. I mean, they need 100 company secretaries, 50 company secretaries for larger groups, SIA, SATs, all those, they have dozens of company secretaries. So yes, it is the same trend here also.
And if someone really wants to enter into the CS Singapore market from very scratch, what are the, things to keep in mind?
Things to keep in mind, first, as I mentioned, that you will have to start low, start small.
Yeah.
Maybe give your ego a bit of push. Don't take your ego that I have 10 years experience and I'm getting a basic job. When you work as a junior, everybody knows time, you might be scolded because you're not aware of something. So you have to keep your ego slightly lower at that time. Be ready to, so come for learning, don't go for the income. You might have to, it might not be no savings for you probably for the first couple of years, but it will pay off in the long run. Second thing is that you'll have to be prepared for cultural differences always. It's the biggest part. I have seen some company secretary coming to Singapore, they went back because they cannot cope up with the culture. So you must be willing to change. The way we do things in India, the corporate culture, the social culture, the societal culture is slightly different. If I compare to West, it's not that different. We have sizable Indian population, we can get Indian food, we have Indian celebrations, festivals, but still it will be sort of a cultural shock, if not shock, cultural shake, I would say. So be prepared for that. Be prepared for the long run. Don't give up easily. Be prepared for, at least give it a try for certain time.
Okay.
And as work side, you said, okay, what type of work you start with. Most of the time in Singapore, many companies are having headquarters. So they have a lot of subsidiaries work over here. So if you are expert into holding subsidiary type of relationship and setting up of the company, you get exposure to incorporate companies in multiple countries across the geographies. So that is the additional, I can say it's a different mindset you need to be a company secretary over here, because you don't get simple company secretary work like for a one company. That is very rare because people don't hire you only for one work. They'll hire you for a multiple task, and being a headquarter in Singapore, you learn multiple countries, different laws and different setups like.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, one final question. I saw the hand here. Yes, sir, please. Final question, yeah.
Yeah, hi. So any
well-
opportunity for the valuation as a registered
Yes,
valuer?
I will tell you what happens. We have a partner, yesterday the
IBS,
madam was there, yeah. So valuation, of course, Singapore being a hub, startup hub, there's always a valuation required for, even for multiple rounds of funding and all those things. So yes, valuers, of course, there are valuers opportunities, but to start, if you're Singapore, very easy for you, but to start and coming from India, it might be slightly difficult because valuation is based on your connections, how many people you know. So if you want to start as a valuer, get your connections first before you move in, otherwise we'll be burning money every month.
thank you.
How important it is to learn a local language here?
Not required. Everybody speaks English, not required.
Local language, but business etiquettes are very, very important. Especially if you're in-house, you need to understand Singapore is not just one country, it's a multicultural nation and a lot of other ethnicities, primarily Chinese, but Malay and Indian as well. And you need to understand simple greeting is also important on how you greet when you are entering in a corporate setting. So I think business etiquette's definitely important to learn. Mandarin, of course, I've been in Singapore long, but I don't know understand Mandarin. But I think as Singapore is getting more integrated to the global economy, knowing additional language would definitely be an added advantage. And I see a lot of companies now asking if you are, multilingual. So I always say I am multilingual. I know Hindi, English, and Punjabi, which is my mother tongue, but that's not really enough. So yeah, knowing an additional language would always be beneficial for your career.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we are well beyond our time. So we will resume after break, tea
So
break.
this is the additional culture which we as an Indian need to learn, because most of the time in Singapore, the meeting starts on time and ends on time. It is never like overlaps. So that's I can say it's a cultural change we need to adapt to when we shift to Singapore. Thank you.
I trust this session was a much needed one, and I believe a lot of questions were answered. Any more information for anybody aspiring to be in Singapore, please feel free to connect with the committee members or connect over LinkedIn.